Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The sun was setting over Naval Station Norfolk, casting a golden light over the moored ships and metal hangars. The Admiral Jonathan Hayes, 48 years old, black and proud of his heritage, had just finished an important strategic meeting. For more than 25 years, he had served the Navy with unwavering commitment, rising through the ranks thanks to his intelligence, discipline, and courage. That day, he felt tired but satisfied. His career, marked by decorations and risky missions, was about to reach a new peak, the promotion to Vice Admiral. He climbed into his car, a sleek black SUV, and prepared to head home, ready to enjoy a rare moment of tranquility. But a few meters from the base exit, a siren sounded behind him. Officer Bradley Collins, a young white police officer, ordered him to stop. Jonathan slowed down, raising his hands in a gesture of cooperation, expecting a routine check. Collins, however, would hear none of it. His eyes shining with authority and arrogance, he made vague and unfounded accusations. "You fit the description of a suspect. Get out of the vehicle." Jonathan, calm but shocked, identified himself. "I am Admiral Jonathan Hayes of the United States Navy. I can show you my badge and papers." The police officer's only response was a condescending sneer. What was supposed to be a simple commute home turned into a public nightmare. Passers-by, surveillance cameras, and soon, social media would witness an injustice that would shatter Jonathan's career in a matter of seconds. Jonathan Hayes felt his heart race as Officer Collins approached his window. The flashing lights reflected off the shiny leather of his SUV and the carefully worn military decorations on his uniform. Jonathan rolled down the window and calmly showed his Navy insignia. "Good evening, officer. My name is Admiral Jonathan Hayes. May I ask why I am being arrested?" he asked firmly but politely. Collins stared at him, frowning. "You match the description of a suspect in this area. Exit the vehicle." Jonathan sighed inwardly. He'd heard of this type of racial profiling, but he never imagined he'd experience it firsthand. He slowly got out of the car, removing his admiral's hat and keeping his hands visible. "I assure you, you're making a mistake. I'm a naval officer. I didn't do anything suspicious." But Collins wouldn't listen. Impulsive and arrogant, he began to search Jonathan brutally. Every decoration, every badge seemed worthless to him. Passers-by began to stop, some discreetly taking photos or videos. The shock on their faces betrayed the blatant injustice they were witnessing. Jonathan remained calm, knowing that anger would accomplish nothing. Yet inside, he was seething. His career, his honor, and everything he had worked for were in danger of being destroyed by this single act of racism and abuse of power. As he was handcuffed and led to the police vehicle, Jonathan met Collins's gaze. The confident officer saw only a citizen to be reprimanded. But Jonathan knew this encounter would set off a chain of events that would not only jeopardize his career, but also expose a systemic injustice that no one could ignore. The police vehicle rolled slowly along the streetlight-lined road, with Jonathan handcuffed in the back. Every jolt of the seat reminded him of the injustice he was experiencing. His thoughts raced. How could a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country be treated like this? Around him, passers-by began filming the scene. A teenager's phone captured every moment, Collins's every move, every word he spoke. Jonathan, though humiliated, remained calm. "Officer Collins, please respect my status and my department. There must be some mistake." Collins snorted. "Status, service. It doesn't change anything. You're just like everyone else, you know." The words rang out like a clap of thunder. Jonathan felt anger rise, but he suppressed it. He knew any impulsive reaction would be used against him. He took a deep breath, recalling years of military discipline. Outside, the video began circulating on social media. It quickly reached hundreds, then thousands of views. Comments ranged from outrage to disbelief, a naval officer arrested for no apparent reason. Local media picked up the story, adding interviews with witnesses shocked by the arrest. In the car, Jonathan stared out the window, taking in the faces of the people around him, some sympathetic, others indifferent. Every gaze seemed to weigh on him, yet he never lost his dignity. He knew that beyond this humiliation, he had to remain strong. His reputation, his honor, and his career were at stake, and he couldn't afford to fail, even in the face of such blatant injustice. As the car pulled up to the police station, Jonathan felt the weight of the moment. Every second, every movement Collins made, every glance the witnesses gave was cementing this scene in history. He would have to fight, not just for his career, but for the respect and justice he had always been owed. Just hours after the incident, the video filmed by bystanders began to spread on social media. The footage showed Admiral Jonathan Hayes, in impeccable uniform, handcuffed by a police officer who was completely unaware of his rank and accomplishments. Internet users were shocked. How could a naval officer be treated in such a manner? Local and national media picked up the story. Online newspapers headlined, "An admiral arrested without reason? Racial injustice strikes again." Television networks broadcast the footage on a loop, analyzing every move made by Officer Collins and every expression made by Jonathan. Some military experts were interviewed, recalling that Jonathan Hayes was a respected and decorated officer. For Jonathan, this unexpected exposure was a mixture of anguish and relief. The public shame was real, but having the world see what he was going through offered a chance for justice. At the same time, he knew that this exposure could also have negative consequences for his career. Rumors and hasty judgments were already circulating in the corridors of the Navy. His colleagues, subordinates, and even some superiors began to contact him. Messages of support poured in, some anonymous, others official, expressing anger at the unjustified arrest and their solidarity with Jonathan. But within headquarters, not everyone was of the same opinion. Some influential officers, fearing public pressure or sharing implicit prejudices, began to question his behavior, suggesting that his reputation might be tarnished by the incident. Jonathan knew that every word, every reaction, would be scrutinized. He had to remain in control of himself to transform this injustice into a signal of strength and dignity. The video became an immediate symbol. Hashtags began to circulate, and military and civilian forums discussed systemic racism and abuse of power. What began as a humiliating arrest morphed into a national battle for recognition, justice, and respect. Despite the outpouring of public support, Jonathan quickly felt the damaging effects of the incident on his career. At headquarters, some influential voices whispered that the arrest could tarnish the Navy's image. Superiors, some sensitive to media pressure, began to question his crisis management skills, subtly implying that he should have avoided the incident. Jonathan was receiving mixed messages, congratulations from some colleagues, cautious advice from others, and innuendos from those who wanted to use the opportunity to slow his promotion. Tensions mounted further when he learned that his candidacy for vice admiral was temporarily suspended while the matter was clarified. At home, he also had to deal with his family's worries. His wife, Vanessa Hayes, supported him unconditionally, but saw the impact of the injustice on his morale. His children, proud of their father, were devastated by the way a man of his caliber had been treated. Jonathan found himself torn between anger, frustration, and the duty to remain irreproachable. Every day at the office became a test of patience and resilience. Some colleagues looked at him differently, others were cautious, fearing that their proximity to him would attract trouble. Jonathan knew he had to skillfully navigate this tense climate, protecting his honor while preparing his response. Yet he refused to give in to fear or anger. Every morning, as he put on his uniform, he reminded himself why he had chosen this career: to serve his country with integrity and dignity. This conviction gave him the strength to continue, to resist pressure, and to prepare a response that would hold Collins accountable for his actions, while preserving his career and his honor. As the case continued to dominate the media, Jonathan Hayes began to receive an unexpected outpouring of support. Former colleagues, junior officers, and even some superiors who had long admired his work sent him messages of solidarity. Each highlighted his integrity, courage, and unwavering dedication to the Navy. In the streets, civilians peacefully demonstrated to denounce injustice. Placards displayed phrases such as "Justice for Admiral Hayes" and "Racism equals no," social media was flooded with hashtags in his favor, and the video of his arrest became a national symbol of the fight against abuse of power and systemic racism. Jonathan remained humble but determined. He knew this support was valuable, but he had to act strategically. With the help of Colonel Marcus Reynolds, a longtime friend and mentor in the Navy, he began organizing an official response, documenting every detail of the arrest and gathering witness testimony. Public pressure was also beginning to affect the police department. Officer Bradley Collins, who had felt invincible, began receiving calls and questions from his superiors. Rumors of internal sanctions were growing, and for the first time, Collins seemed to fear that his irresponsible behavior would have real consequences. For Jonathan, this wave of support represented a breath of hope. He understood that strength lies not only in weapons or rank, but in the ability to inspire others, to maintain dignity despite injustice, and to turn humiliation into leverage for justice. This unexpected support would become the key to his revenge, not only to save his career, but also to show that truth and honor can triumph even in the face of the most blatant abuse of power. Faced with public outrage and overwhelming evidence, the Navy opened a formal investigation into the incident. Jonathan Hayes was asked to provide a detailed account of his arrest and Officer Collins's actions. Every word he uttered was precise, measured, yet charged with gravity. At the same time, Collins was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. For the first time, his characteristic arrogance began to waver. His superiors questioned him about his motives and methods, and he realized that his impulsive decisions and implicit racism could cost him his career. Jonathan, despite the initial humiliation, held his head high. He knew that his honor and reputation were his greatest weapon. In the corridors of the Navy, high-ranking officers discussed the matter at length. Many expressed their solidarity, but some still feared the impact on the institution's image. Meanwhile, the media continued to report the story, increasing the pressure on the local police and Collins. The Navy, aware that this case had national repercussions, decided to highlight Jonathan's professionalism and integrity, while ensuring that action would be taken to punish the abuse of power. Jonathan worked with his legal team and mentors to provide all the necessary evidence, videos, testimonies from civilians and colleagues, and his own detailed account. Each document strengthened his position and confronted Collins with the undeniable truth. For Jonathan, this step was not just a personal struggle. It was a battle for justice, to show that racism and abuse of authority could not triumph over truth and dignity. The internal investigation thus became a tool to restore not only his career, but also the honor of all those who served with integrity. The next few days were crucial. The Navy's internal investigation was progressing rapidly, and the evidence against Officer Collins was proving overwhelming. Bystander videos, testimonies from civilians and colleagues, and camera footage from the naval base clearly demonstrated that Jonathan Hayes had committed no wrongdoing. Each new revelation increased support for the admiral. Newspapers and social media relayed the evidence one by one, highlighting Collins's arrogance and injustice. Military experts were now commenting on the incident, recalling Jonathan's exemplary record, his high-risk missions, his decorations, and his renowned leadership. Collins, who thought he could ignore the criticism and hide behind his authority, began to feel the pressure mounting. His superiors questioned him about his motives and behavior, and the inconsistencies in his justifications were quickly exposed. There was no longer any doubt, the arrest was based on racial prejudice and a blatant abuse of power. For Jonathan, the situation, though painful, was confirmation that the truth always emerges. He felt vindictive, but remained cautious. He knew the battle for his career and honor was not over, and that justice must be complete. The revelations also sparked a national movement of support. Military associations, civil rights organizations, and ordinary citizens raised their voices, calling for sanctions against Collins and measures to prevent future abuses. Jonathan's story became a symbol of courage and resilience, inspiring many to stand up against injustice and systemic racism. In every interview, in every public statement, Jonathan displayed his intact dignity, refusing to be defined by the humiliation he had suffered. His calm and determination further amplified the outrage against Collins and encouraged him in his fight for justice. A few weeks after the revelations, the case of Admiral Jonathan Hayes's arrest became a highly publicized trial. Officer Bradley Collins was now charged with abuse of power and racial discrimination. The national media covered every moment, and thousands of people watched the proceedings live. Jonathan appeared as the star witness. Sitting upright, dressed in his impeccable uniform, he calmly laid out the facts, the baseless accusations, Collins's impulsive and racist behavior, and the way he had been publicly humiliated. Each word was precise, measured, yet powerful. His dignity and calm, contrasting with Collins's arrogance, struck all observers. Civilian and military witnesses corroborated his story. Bystander videos, surveillance camera recordings, and testimony from colleagues unequivocally established Collins's misconduct. The jurors and the public were struck by the gravity of Collins's abuse of power. For Collins, the trial was a shock. His clumsy excuses and attempts at justification convinced no one. The truth came to light: his decision had been motivated by racial prejudice and excessive arrogance. The verdict was historic. Collins was found guilty and suspended from duty, while the Navy and local authorities promised measures to prevent such abuses from happening again. Jonathan, although deeply scarred by the experience, remained the figure of dignity and courage that the entire country admired. The story of his trial became a national symbol. It showed that integrity, courage, and perseverance can triumph in the face of injustice, and that even the most rigid systems can be held accountable for their mistakes. After the trial, Jonathan Hays gradually regained his place within the Navy. His reputation, intact in the eyes of his colleagues and the public, was strengthened. Those who had doubted him or tried to take advantage of the situation saw their credibility diminish in the face of the clarity of the facts and the admiration Jonathan inspired. Despite the humiliation he suffered, Jonathan did not seek open revenge. He preferred to let his strength and integrity speak for himself. Every decision, every action he took at work from then on reflected his calm, competence, and determination. His superiors, impressed by his resilience, confirmed his promotion to vice admiral. Jonathan's colleagues and subordinates, inspired by his measured and courageous response, saw him as a model of leadership. He became a mentor to young officers, especially those facing situations of discrimination or injustice, showing them that it was possible to overcome obstacles without losing one's dignity. Even in the public sphere, Jonathan continued to make his voice heard. He participated in conferences, interviews, and civic events to raise awareness about systemic racism and the importance of integrity in the military. His silent revenge was complete. Where Collins had tried to discredit him, Jonathan had transformed the ordeal into a demonstration of moral and professional strength. Every step he took through the halls of the Navy, every decision he made, was a silent affirmation of his honor. His career story, marked by courage and resilience, became an example to all who aspire to serve with integrity despite obstacles. Months after the incident, Admiral Jonathan Hays had become more than just a respected officer. He was a national symbol of courage, dignity, and resilience. His career, restored and strengthened, allowed him to establish mentorship programs for young officers, particularly those facing discrimination or systemic bias. The Navy, inspired by his moral strength, adopted new policies to prevent abuse of power and promote equality within its ranks. Training sessions on systemic racism and justice were instituted, and Jonathan's story served as a case study to demonstrate how an officer could maintain integrity even in the most difficult times. Jonathan, always humble, rejected excessive public honors. For him, the important thing was not revenge, but to transform humiliation into a life lesson for future generations. He continued to serve with dedication, but also to educate and inspire, leaving behind a lasting legacy of justice and honor. Collins, meanwhile, left the force after his suspension and faced the consequences of his actions. His fall served as a bitter reminder that arrogance and racism come at a price, and that truth always triumphs in the end. Jonathan Hays's story was shared in schools, conferences, and civic forums, inspiring thousands to stand up against injustice. What began as a humiliating arrest became a universal lesson: dignity, courage, and integrity can never be destroyed by fear or the abuse of power. And as Jonathan gazed at the horizon from the bridge of a ship, he knew he had transformed a personal ordeal into a collective legacy, a silent but eternal victory against injustice.